Chapter 1 Chapter 1 I'm sorry. The healer is grim as she delivers her prognosis. Lady Malfoy's pregnancy is slowly killing her, and there is nothing we can do. Lucius Malfoy grips his wife's hand tightly as the healer describes how diagnostic spells have discovered potent magic in Narcissa's womb, but have failed to identify any cause. Without knowing the cause, no real treatment can be devised. Narcissa trembles as the healer explains that they are doing everything they can to mitigate the strain on her body, but so far the various potions and attempts at different spells have done nothing to slow the deterioration. When the healer admits that her condition is rapidly escalating the closer she gets to term, Narcissa asks softly, "Will my child survive?" Yes. From all indications, the baby appears to be in good health. But Lady Malfoy, that is all I need to know, Narcissa interrupts before the healer can say anything more. Lucius marvels at his wife. Such devotion as she unflinchingly accepts her duty to carry his heir. He thinks it will be a shame to lose her. He tells himself that there is no reason for regret, and almost believes it. When Lady Malfoy dies in childbirth despite the healer's best efforts, Lucius' grief and guilt are tempered only by the strange and powerful magic he feels radiating from his newborn son. He reminds himself that the need for a powerful heir has justified the cost of his wife's death. He knows that this is the price of ensuring his family's legacy. But what Lucius Malfoy does not know is that, while Draco Malfoy is born the flesh and blood of Lucius and Narcissa, his magic is entirely from another world. The ritual he performed on the night of his heir's conception caused Draco to be, in essence, half-human because he is born Arflekis magic. Loki had given very little thought to the so-called magical mortals of Midgard, creatures whose ability was so feeble that they needed to craft wands to focus their meager magic into something useful, and so weak-willed that they needed to speak their spells aloud and use precise wand movements. So pitiful was this realm's mortal magic that the more advanced sorcerers on Midgard were only as such because they relied much upon drawing power from other dimensions. But Loki is fascinated by the human child who carries his magic. In the past, the trickster has conjured constructs of his Seidr that have been labeled as his children. Sleipnir, Fenrir, Jörmungandr, these were his creations true enough, but his Seidr could not create a soul for them. Those creatures were simply products of his imagination and his greatest works of art, no matter what stories and myths proclaimed. But this little dragon Ishi's, Loki's own Seidr, flows within the boy. To his amazement, the child is so much more his than anything else he's ever known in his life. Loki watches as Draco grows, amused that he can understand any languages his tutors try to teach him because he carries the gift of Allspeak. The mortals marvel at the frequency and strength of the child's accidental magic, which is merely the faintest thread of his barely developing powers. Loki can feel the hidden potential within Draco, and it fills him with pride. The second prince of Asgard decides that he will one day train his little dragon properly into his true inheritance after the boy learns the rudiments of Midgard's simple magics. Even still, Loki routinely visits the child of his Seidr in the still of the night. He'll usually appear in the form of a wolf or a snake, but even as a toddler, Draco recognizes Loki no matter what form he uses. The child is never afraid. The boy clings to him however he appears, apparently finding some comfort and security in Loki's presence. It stirs something powerful inside him. He feels a protective instinct and desire for the child's well-being that is impossible to ignore. There is no reason to take the child now. Loki reasons against these curious emotions. Draco is safe and well cared for. It is not yet time. Of all the places in the 9 realms, it is surprising to learn that Loki has been spending his time in Midgard. In truth, Odin is much more aware of Loki's comings and goings than he lets on. Whatever he cannot glean through Hlithskjalf, Hugin and Munin diligently report to him. As such, Odin is not ignorant of Loki's many schemes despite what his youngest son might assume. Most of them are harmless enough that Odin has no reason to involve himself, even if he does not understand Loki's need to risk his safety merely to have some secret revenge on a diplomat who has done something to offend. Odin reasons that if he confronts Loki about his more questionable activities, his child is talented enough to find a way to hide himself from even Heimdall's sight. Even now, the gatekeeper complains that at times Loki's presence is difficult to discern. Thus, so long as the peace of the realms is not endangered, Odin is agreeable to allow Loki his penchant for mischief. But when the Allfather asks Heimdall to report on Loki's activities on Midgard, the gatekeeper abashedly reports that his sight is somehow unable to pierce through the weavings Loki has crafted. The revelation that Loki has learned to hide his presence completely from Heimdall, coupled with his frequent disappearances of late, is troubling. Odin sends Hugin and Munin under the cover of his strongest enhancements, so that his spies may remain hidden from Loki's workings. The news they had brought back is quite unexpected. By his raven's account, Loki is visiting a mortal child. Odin's first thought is that Loki has foolishly fallen in love with a mortal and gotten her with child, yet that didn't quite make sense. Surely he would have claimed the baby by now if that were the case. No child of the royal bloodline would be left on such a primitive planet to be raised by mortals. It was baffling. Still, Odin does not feel compelled to order Loki to cease, as these acts do not violate the long-standing decree of non-interference. Nothing Loki has done threatens any kind of war. The Allfather shakes his head. Hugin and Munin have more important missions to attend. Besides, how much mischief could surround a Midgardian child? When Draco is 7 years old, Lucius hits him in the face with a stinging hex because the boy has brought a muggle book home. "Where did you get this filth?" Lucius demands. Draco is crouched over in pain with his hand on his cheek. With tears streaming down his face, he whimpers, My friend. Your friend. You are the Malfoy heir, and you will not be friends with the disgusting mongrel spawn of a mud blood," Lucius says with disgust. "You are never to speak to them again." "No," Draco wails, and his raw emotions cause the magic within him to erupt out of control. When the wild magic pushes Lucius back several feet, he is enraged at his heir's defiance and casts another stinging hex to put him in his place. But then the wild magic, now billowing around the boy like a white fog, absorbs the hex. As Draco's cries grow louder, the fog becomes a vortex of swirling energy. Reacting to a growing fear of Draco's volatile magic, Lucius decides to use the Cruciatus curse, reasoning that its dark properties will certainly cut through the whirling energy. He won't make it strong enough to damage his heir, of course, but just enough to put a healthy amount of necessary fear and respect into the child. Lucius lifts his wand again and snarls, Crucio. Bright yellow magic shoots towards the boy and the curse connects. Draco screams and the wild magic dissipates. Barely a second passes, and Lucius is just about to release the curse when he is slammed into the wall so powerfully that all the air rushes from his lungs. His wand falls to the floor and rolls away. A strangely dressed wizard with green eyes filled with fury has suddenly appeared, somehow apparating through his family's ancient and powerful wards. His pride wants to demand who would have the audacity to attack the Lord of Malfoy Manor in his own home, but he cannot speak. His entire body is frozen, and his mouth will not move. All he can do is watch in muted horror while his instincts scream that this mysterious wizard is as dangerous as this dark lord himself. Lucius is filled with despair as the violent intruder turns and crouches over the only thing he values more than his own life. "Can you stand, little dragon?" The dark-haired wizard, whose eyes seem to glow eerily, asks the little boy. It is a surprisingly gentle tone, considering the fierceness of his expression. Draco sniffles softly and then murmurs a quiet yes in answer. As the child stands up, his eyes fall upon the stranger. The boy's face scrunches up in confusion, and his head tilts a bit to the side as if he is trying to figure something out. Suddenly, there is a black and grey spotted falcon flapping its wings in place of the wizard. An animagus, Lucius thinks. The falcon lands gracefully on the floor, and then, incredibly, the man shifts again into a large snake with dark green scales to Lucius' awe. And then, impassably, his assailant changes shape yet a third time into a black wolf before returning to his human form. "It is you," Draco squeals in recognition, and then throws his arms around the stranger's waist, squeezing tightly. The man smiles fondly and pats Draco on the head and says, "Yes, my little dragon. I've been watching you always." If Lucius were not already frozen by magic, he would be freezing in fright at the revelation that this powerful dark wizard has been stalking his heir. The unknown wizard tells Draco to call Darby and ask the house elf if he will accept freedom in exchange for a paying job serving a new household. Lucius is affronted at the subservience Draco displays when he instantly does as he is told. After the house elf agrees without hesitation, Draco again obeys the trespasser without question when he is instructed to give the house elf his socks. The boy giggles at how happy the creature is to receive them, completely oblivious to the dangerous situation unfolding. Lucius realizes with dread what the wizard is planning. He means to kidnap the Malfoy heir. His fear is confirmed when the wizard pulls out a galleon and says that Darby works for him now and that the house elf's first task is to take all of Draco's belongings to the Odinson estate. Lucius struggles to remember anything about any wizarding family by the name of Odinson. It sounds familiar and foreign at the same time. He's certain he's heard the name somewhere before, but any insight he might have in the recesses of memory escapes him in his panic. "I had decided to let him grow up among your kind and present him with his birthright after he matured," the threatening wizard reveals with a sneer, finally addressing Lucius. "However, I will not allow the child of my magic to suffer abuse at the hands of his mortal sire." The invisible force holding Lucius against the wall disappears suddenly, and he falls to the floor in a crumpled heap. Shaken and confused at the man's words, he barely manages to stutter. "Teether, the child of your magic." The dark wizard smiles cruelly. "Why, yes. You were the one who performed the ritual which summoned my magic, oh, nearly 7 years ago. And though the boy is of your blood, he is born off my magic." Lucius' stomach drops. His whole body feels numb. He has sacrificed so much. It can't have possibly done anything like what this wizard is implying. No, 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 it's not possible. Lucius thinks with panic. Draco is mine. My child, my heir. As if using legilimency, the invader answers his frantic unspoken thoughts and declares, "Oh, how wrong you are. Magic is the purest and most superior claim there is. The child is mine by right." "That's impossible," Lucius rages at the absurd assertion. His shock replaced by outrage at the insanity of the ludicrous claim. The ritual was to summon the oldest magic. He tries to reason before he is cut off by the other wizard's ominous laughter. A malevolent magical aura envelopes the room, so heavy that Lucius can barely breathe through it. He distantly notes that it feels similar to Draco's odd magic, even as his vision starts to blur. His attacker fixes upon Lucius an expression of pure malice and decrees, "You will never set eyes upon Mitchell again. A glorious destiny awaits him. And you, Lucius Malfoy, you Aaronworthy." Lucius Malfoy has been threatened with imprisonment in Azkaban. He's endured the Cruciatus curse cast by the Dark Lord himself. He's watched his wife slowly die from the magic that he himself summoned. And yet, he's never felt so helpless. "Wareu," Lucius rasps, struggling to remain conscious and desperate to know the answer to this one question. "I am Loki, son of Odin, prince of Asgard," Lucius faints. Loki knelt down and looked earnestly into the boy's grey eyes. "You are safe now, my little dragon. From now on you will live with me." The gratitude and adoration that beams from Draco's face is startling. It is a sight that both warms and startles Loki. Countless times, others had looked upon Thor in a similar way. He himself had looked to his golden brother at times when he'd felt vulnerable, and Thor's presence suddenly made everything all right. though he'd never admit it. "I'll protect you," a young Thor had declared as the Bilgisnipe began to charge towards them. They had been seeking adventure and knew real danger for the first time in their lives. Though some small part of Loki doubted that his brother's wooden sword would protect them, it was drowned out by his overwhelming faith in Thor. Loki smiled at the childhood memory. Thor had asked him to find a way to escape the guard who would accompany them outside the palace walls, so he pilfered a sleeping draught from his magic tutor's stock and slipped it into the guard's drink. Thor and Loki had wandered for some time when they unknowingly crossed into the Bilgisnipe's territory. Before the beast could attack them, however, their father had appeared and stopped the Bilgisnipe in its tracks. But even though their father had rescued them, Thor was still the hero in Loki's eyes. His brother didn't hesitate to step in front of danger to protect him. Not that day or any day since. Ever since that moment, Loki had wanted nothing more than to be just like his older brother. But despite his constant vigilance, he remained ignored and forgotten within Asgard. Standing in those glittering halls, Loki was nothing more than a shadow cast by his golden brother. And yet, to this half-mortal child, who is now Loki's by some strange design of the Norns. After centuries in the dark, Loki feels himself dawning like the light of a morning star in this child's eyes. After centuries of being his brother's shadow, Loki has suddenly become someone's son. It is unexpectedly powerful in a way Loki could never have imagined and humbles him like nothing ever has before. His chest tightens with emotion as he thinks. The ways of the Norns are strange. But sometimes they are also kind. Loki is pulled out of his introspection when a small and hesitant voice asks, "What do I call you?" When Draco asks this question, the decision to have the boy call him by an Old Norse word is not on a whim. Loki knows that the meaning of the word as conveyed to his little dragon is far more important than the word itself. The boy's understanding of the word, father, had been shaped and corrupted by Lucius' actions. And so, Loki gives Draco a new word to attribute all that Loki intends on being for the child of his magic. Since Allspeak lived in Draco's veins as surely as Loki's Sather, only the two of them would hear the word father, while everyone else on Midgard would hear father, as it was spoken in their native tongue. This simple word was Loki's promise to Draco. Because small children need rules and structure, Loki establishes a routine for his little dragon. They are up at dawn to do meditative stretching and light exercises. Then, after a good breakfast is had, and the mind still focused in the early hours of the day, Draco's tutelage in magic and knowledge begins. Because Loki abhors predictability, every day's instruction is different. Some mornings are focused entirely on teaching his little dragon about magic, not just about his own Sather and how to focus and wield it, but also the possibilities and potentials of magic in all its various forms. Most other days are reserved for educating the boy about the history, culture, politics, and traditions of all the 9 realms, with special emphasis on Midgard, magical and non-magical communities alike, and Asgard. So much of what society dictates is a construct born out of tradition, and an understanding of the different cultures will give the boy a unique perspective not achieved by most mortals in their lifetimes. Finally, rounding out the boy's education, Loki will take a day or two each week to instruct Draco in other subjects, such as mathematics, science, and music. Eager to learn, his young charge's mind soaks up new knowledge like a sponge. It's pleasing that Draco's mind is so pliant, as Loki wants the boy to be flexible and adaptable in his thinking. Often, he will give instructions that are implicit suggestions, so that the boy learns how to interpret the meaning between words. Draco is quick-witted and eager to please, thriving most when receiving healthy amounts of praise balanced with gentle criticism. Loki feels compelled to give his child everything he could ever desire, but manages to curb his inclination towards spoiling him, if only by reminding himself of the flaws which came about in his older brother, because Thor always got whatever he wanted. He wondered how spoiled and willful Thor was by the time he was born. Had his parents actually decided to take a different approach with Loki because they had realized their mistake with Thor? Is it possible that their intentions were for his good? The memories of feeling ignored as a child still sting. But now, he can at least lavish all the attention he wished he had upon his little dragon. Loki loves the bright smile gifted to him whenever he tells Draco that he has done well. It is a healing balm which eases some of the centuries-old resentment. Loki marvels at this novel perspective. It's one that he never would have had if Draco had not come into his life. His little dragon's magic is so responsive and familiar that it is easy to instruct the boy to weave illusions. He is just as proficient as Loki was at that same age. And Loki is particularly pleased that Draco takes to shapeshifting surprisingly soon, for it has always been one of Loki's most draining abilities. When Draco first starts learning to shift his form, the boy goes around for over a week with black hair and green eyes. Then, after several months, the child begins to grasp the ability to shift into animal forms and quickly progresses. Draco's magic so much like Loki's, and yet its own boy's animal forms tend to be light in color, while Loki's own Sather is of a disposition to favor darker colors. As impractical as it is, Loki finds this tendency of Draco towards shifting into albino animals terribly endearing. When the boy shifted into a white-colored raven, Loki had barely been able to hold back his laughter out of concern that it might discourage Draco's first attempt at shifting into a bird's form. A white raven is a bit conspicuous. Perhaps try a dove, Loki had remarked behind his hand. Despite his prodigious grasp on weaving illusions and shifting form, Draco is still so very young, so very new to life. The child is frustrated in his attempts to focus his magic outward something which gave Loki no trouble as a child. While he's slowly beginning to understand how to gather magical energy in his hands or around him as a protective barrier, even if he still hasn't quite managed it yet, there is little to no force when he tries to use his Sather offensively to affect the world around him. Loki suspects that the child's challenge in focusing his magic outwards is due to some influence of his human biology, but it is nothing that Draco won't be able to overcome with more time and training. This is part of the reason why Draco will need to learn the most basic fundamentals of mortal magic at Hogwarts. Loki will often discuss with Draco the virtues and vices of the 4 Hogwarts houses. It is one of Draco's favorite topics, especially after he had told the child that he had actually met the founders of the school over 1,000 years ago. "Father, which is the best Hogwarts house?" Draco had asked one day. "Ah, but that is not a very good question, little dragon." "What does best truly mean?" Loki queries before his voice turns wistful. "Even I couldn't qualify any of the houses as being so broadly the best of all, and I knew the founders." Draco's eyes were nearly bulging out of their sockets when he asked excitedly, "You actually met the Hogwarts founders, Father?" "You must be really old," Loki had laughed softly. "Indeed, my little dragon." The flow of time between the 9 realms was not uniform nor constant. Vanaheim's time flowed the most similarly to Asgard, with variations of only hours or days at most. And it was believed that Helheim had the most extreme time differentials where, after one single hour in that dead realm, a decade would pass on Asgard and a century would pass on Midgard. Only Heimdall knew for certain the flows of time between the realms intimately, in all his watchfulness, and Loki had never wanted to venture to Helheim himself to find out the truth. Between Asgard and Midgard, the passage of time was the most uncertain, but tended towards a slower passage of time on the mortal's world. Thus, when the equivalent of more than 100 Midgardian years had passed on Asgard after his father's victory against the frost giants at the Battle of Tonsberg, less than half that time had passed at the actual site where the battle was fought. It was around the Sometime in the 990s AD, by the current mortal calendar when Loki had first learned how to navigate the secret paths between the realms. Perhaps it was because it was forbidden, or perhaps it was because he vividly remembered his father's stories about the Battle of Tonsberg, where the warriors of Asgard saved Midgard from the invading Frost giant army. But Midgard had been one of the worlds that Loki always delighted in sneaking off to. Were you there when the founders made Hogwarts, Father? Yes, little dragon, I was there. I even helped. In the early years of Hogwarts, Loki had challenged the four founders on their methods and helped them think through and imagine greater possibilities for the school. There were a few enchantments of Loki's own design at Hogwarts which still baffled people to this very day, and thus were simply attributed to the greatness of the founders. In his own way, Loki had a silent hand in creating the foundation of the school. For that reason, Hogwarts had received a regular and generous donation from the Odinson family throughout the centuries, much to the frustration of Durmstrang administrators who were quite persistent in seeking more support than the token donation it would receive in comparison. The founders had declared that any future child of Loki's family would always have a place at Hogwarts. At the time, he had graciously thanked them while internally scoffing at the idea of any child of his attending a Midgardian school. The Norns have quite the sense of humor, mused Loki as he made plans for Draco to attend Hogwarts. Loki has fond memories of the Hogwarts founders. Not only were they the first mortal friends he ever made, but they were also some of the most interesting magical mortals he's ever encountered in his visits to Midgard. Watching the house philosophies distill into caricatures of the founders' most notorious characteristics was a bit disheartening. His memories of them were so much more vibrant than the two-dimensional archetypes that had carried on throughout the ages. Who was your favorite of the four? Draco had asked. Your questions, little dragon, are far too broad and sweeping, Loki reprimands. Will you gain the information you seek with a question like that? If I simply answered, Slytherin, because of their house colors, would that satisfy your curiosity? Draco frowns thoughtfully, and Loki decides to go easy on the boy and adds, but I'll tell you whose favorite was. Salazar Slytherin was always the most eager out of the four founders to seek his company. Loki has always suspected that the wizard's choice of green in his house colors was more than a mere coincidence. Yet Salazar's house, like all the Hogwarts houses, was a poor reflection of the mortal Loki had known. The man was soft-spoken and quietly thoughtful, the most gentle of the four. Loki had helped cultivate Salazar's esteem for cunning and ambition as a sword and shield of the mind, because it suited the introverted mortal best. He had greatly approved of those being incorporated as values for Salazar's Hogwarts house. Unfortunately, Loki was unsuccessful in curbing the mortal's almost manic paranoia about non-magical mortals discovering the wizarding world. It was disappointing, yet not surprising, that such sentiments became magnified into the fanatical rhetoric of zealots over the centuries. Father, do only the bravest students get sorted into Gryffindor? An interesting question, little dragon. Why do you think that? Draco rolled his eyes. Father, the boy whined, you always answer my questions with questions. Not always, Loki corrected, but often, yes. Especially when you ask without thinking about the answer you truly want. Loki had liked Godric Gryffindor because he had a bravery similar to Thor's, but without his brother's frustrating stubbornness and pride. It was refreshing how the man genuinely cared to listen to the viewpoints of others. A large part of what made Godric such a good leader was his willingness to see different perspectives in order to understand the larger picture. It was this quality that brought and held the founder seat so very different under the singular vision of creating Hogwarts. Sadly, only the wizard's traits of boldness seem to have survived the passage of time. The products of his Hogwarts house stubbornly clung most tightly to the things that brought the most glory and eventually became, in Loki's mind, a house with many who needed desperately to be told that they were worthy. Father, my old tutors said that Hufflepuff was the most useless house. That's not true, is it? Ah, a better question, little dragon, Loki assessed, and Draco puffed out his chest proudly at the compliment. But before I answer, what do you know of Hufflepuff House? I think that Hufflepuffs like to work hard and find things. That is exactly why they are the most underestimated house. I will tell you the tale of Helga Hufflepuff, who was as ferocious in battle as the shield maiden Sif. Helga Hufflepuff's legacy was probably the most intact in function, if not in form. She had rather reminded Loki of Sif in her toughness, and was one of the few mortals he'd ever admit would be welcome at his side in battle. Her grit gave her the reputation of never being afraid of hard work. At the time of the founding of Hogwarts, no one would have dared underestimate Helga, and yet somehow her house had become known as meekly lacking any of the traits so vaunted by the other houses. It seemed that over the centuries, people had forgotten about the viciousness of the badger. As far as Loki could tell, Helga's ferocious spirit still remained within the house she founded, and that proved to be a hidden asset. Loki could only approve as being underestimated generally worked to one's advantage. Fathier, since Ravenclaw cares most about intelligence, would I only be sorted into it if I was one of the smartest in my year? No, Draco. As it is today, the value that Ravenclaw House places on intelligence is more about the love of knowledge. Besides, there are other traits that Ravenclaw is known for, such as creativity and wit. You said, as it is today. Draco paused in thought. Fathier, do you mean that Ravenclaw House was different in the past? Rowena Ravenclaw's Hogwarts house had an incomplete imitation of the woman's love of learning. She was an amusingly clever mortal, and would have despaired over her legacy, focusing on such myopic views of knowledge. More so, the mortal would have hated how her successors had twisted the image of her favorite animal into a sentiment she did not believe in. Rowena loved the eagle because she loved birds and thought it was the most majestic of all. Yet, at some point in time, someone decided that Ravenclaw's emblem was an eagle because it soars where others cannot climb. This was the beginning of an unspoken sentiment in Ravenclaw House that only they were smart enough to figure out the secrets of the universe, and everyone else was seen as intellectual inferiors. Ironic, considering that one of Rowena Ravenclaw's favorite sayings was, "Humility is the beginning of wisdom." Notwithstanding the flaws he saw in each of the Hogwarts houses, Loki also appreciated their strengths. If Draco could understand both the negative and positive aspects of each house, not only would that optimize his growth, it would also give him valuable perspective and insight about students in other houses. The other benefit to Draco attending Hogwarts is that his little dragon will be able to put into practice and experiment with all the things he's learning about leveraging social interactions. Developing his political senses, as well as learning how to recognize both opportunity and threat, are talents that can't be honed without practical experience after all. The boy's interest flits through each house, and though Loki speculates about where his little dragon will eventually be sorted, he does nothing to influence him in any direction. After all, what use is it in teaching the child to think through his own decisions, if only to manipulate him into choosing Loki's own preference? The sorting hat was his own ancient meant a sort of joke between him and Godric, who kept fretting about students finding their proper place, and he knew what mattered most in the sorting was the child's own choice. Each afternoon, Loki makes sure to give Draco enough physical training to burn up the excess energy that all little boys have. The grounds of the Odinson estate are vast and accommodate a variety of activities. Horseback riding, unarmed combat, archery, and basic weaponry are all things Loki learned during his childhood and eagerly passes on. There is no doubt in his mind that his little dragon should be well versed in these matters, as befits his Asgardian heritage. And through various exercises such as capturing a flag, defended by enchanted furniture, or mobilizing one garden gnome faction against another to conquer and claim, the Quidditch pitch Loki is also instilling a sense of tactics in Draco to hone his little dragon's instincts for battle. The last meal of the day is filled with rich and varied conversation. Loki encourages Draco to express his opinions and ask questions about anything and everything. He wants Draco to learn more than mere rote memorization of facts. He wants to grow the boy's mind and cultivate his curiosity. They do word puzzles together. Loki gives him riddles, and he asks the boy questions that require serious thought and creative application of the subjects he's learning. How would you convince a dwarf from Nidavellir to trust an elf from Ulfheim? Which works of Vanir literature do you think could pass as modern Midgardian literature? Has Midgard's wizarding society hindered its progress by isolating itself from non-magical mortals? Finally, at the end of every day, Loki sends Draco off to bed with kiss on the brow and a book to fall asleep to. Spending his days teaching his little dragon and laying the foundations which will guide the child of his magic towards his potential is more satisfying than he had imagined it would be. Loki finds that he's more than happy he's content. For as long as he could remember, Draco had felt the constant buzz of the magic under his skin. The first time he made a shadow dance, he didn't even understand what he was doing or how he was doing it. All he knew was that it felt right. But when he went to show it to his father, Lucius became angry. He shook Draco by the shoulders and said to him, "You would do well to never show anyone what you have shown me tonight. This, magic, as you call it, it is nothing more than an unfortunate accident of your birth. I will not allow the pureblood heir of the Malfoy name to wield the magic of savages." At the time, Draco had felt guilty and ashamed for being a disappointment to his father. He had tried his best to keep his magic hidden to prevent earning another reprimand. But now, everything was different. At the Odinson estate, he could use his magic openly. It was actually allowed, even encouraged. He could begin to understand his magic and even gain control of it. As he stretched his magic outward into this open space, he began to understand the meaning of the word freedom for the first time. And it is all because of his father. Draco has loved the feeling of the word father since he first spoke it. It has none of that metallic taste born of criticism and neglect that he associates with the word father. Draco will never call Loki father, because Loki is so much better than that. Back when he was at Malfoy Manor, his stupid tutors had told him that he would have to wait until he attended Hogwarts before he could learn how to perform magic. They had ignored Draco when he had asked about the shimmering strands of different colors he'd sometimes see, just because they couldn't see them too. But since coming home with his father, he's learned that what he was seeing were actual threads of magic. He's learned to be able to see them when he wants to, and that he can play with them to make things look different. It was the best feeling in the world to hear, "I'm proud of you, little dragon," when he started to weave illusions without a wand, just like his father. It's been easy to adjust to his new life with his father at the Odinson estate. After all, he had barely seen Lucius, and when he had, Lucius was hardly an affectionate parent. Most of his days had been spent with tutors, and then in the evenings he was fed and cared for by the dutiful house elves who never deviated from the established routines that were dictated by Lord Malfoy. There is no routine here, and Draco loves it. Each day he is taught new things in different ways and tested always when he least expects. His tutors were so boring, but father can make even the most boring subject interesting. More than that, everything he's learning is important. There's always a puzzle to solve, little dragon. The more you know, the more pieces you have to play the game. He still has to learn about wizarding customs, but now he gets to learn about the customs of other worlds too. Draco's imagination is enthralled by the thought of seeing those worlds with his father one day. His daydreaming runs wild, envisioning adventures in Muspelheim and visiting Asgard to see the place his father is from. His father tells him that when they eventually journey to Asgard, Draco is to say his name is Dracolacus, explaining that it's only Draco Odinson here because of Midgard's traditions. Remember well, little dragon, that you must always be flexible and ready to adapt to your surroundings. And he isn't just learning magic or the things found in books, he also gets to play every day. Draco rides horses and shoots arrows and dodges enchanted furniture. Sometimes he just plays board games like wizarding chess or H. Nefertafel with his father. But other times he gets to play out battles on the Quidditch pitch with garden gnomes. Draco dreams of one day leading the blue-shirted garden gnomes to victory against the red-shirted ones. He could hardly believe it when Father said he'd be learning about combat. Like muggle dueling, with weapons, Draco had asked excitedly. His father had chuckled a bit and said armed combat would be for a bit later, but Draco wasn't satisfied with an answer like that. He asked question after question about the weapons on display in the halls. When he found out that his father used knives, he begged to see them. So when his father joined the next Quidditch pitch battle, he let his knives fly, effortlessly pinning down every single one of garden gnomes by their shirts. It was the most incredible thing Draco has ever seen, and he is now determined to be just as good one day. Well, every day isn't perfect. There are still boring parts sometimes, like when it felt like he'd been punching and kicking the training post for hours, or when he was tired of memorizing so many things and the afternoon playtime couldn't come fast enough. There were days when he felt crushed with disappointment if he couldn't perform the spells that his father was teaching him, or if he was clumsy in sparring. He didn't like the way it ached inside when he failed. And there were times when he really wanted more pudding, but then father says he can't have any more. But still, living with his father is better than all the birthdays and all the Christmas mornings he's ever had before. It feels like the most natural thing to leave the name Malfoy behind as he steps into his new life. It feels like coming home. It has been a little over a Midgardian year since Loki had claimed his little dragon when Draco runs up to Loki, excitedly clutching a book of Norse myths, asking if Fenrir, Jörmungandr, and Sleipnir were his brothers. After Loki explains that they were merely magical constructs, Draco's face becomes resigned for a moment before it flashes with inspiration. "Does that mean that I can make friends out of magic too?" the boy asks. Loki sighs. He has begun to notice that the boy is feeling lonely. The house elf Darby helps entertain the child with his antics, but it isn't a substitute for all that had been left behind. When Loki had attempted to bring Draco back to his music lessons, the staff had met them with fear and suspicion before asking them to leave. Apparently, Lucius Malfoy had wasted no time in spreading different rumors in an attempt to save face. That he took no action to dispute Loki's claim was telling, but the rumors sank deeper into people's minds. This mattered little, however. Lucius' tacit acceptance of the loss of his heir was as good as a declaration of the truth for those whose opinions mattered most in wizarding society. Moreover, the Odinson family reputation was ancient and eccentric enough that it didn't really matter what the gossips speculated about anyway. There was quite a tolerance for the odd behavior of powerful wizards from established families, even those labeled as a dangerous madman by someone once accused of being a Death Eater. Still, Loki knows it is simpler to tutor the boy at home and keep him away from any of the toxic lies Lucius is spreading, and better to keep Draco from being questioned about his heritage. In a few years, he'll explain everything to his little dragon properly. The boy is too young yet to be told that the same spell which had made Draco his child also caused his mother's death. As such, Draco spends his days on the estate with just Loki, the house elves, and garden gnome factions for company. Loki had planned on presenting the boy to the court in Asgard on his 9th birthday, but as he considered it, he thinks perhaps there is no real reason to wait. The child's Sather is strong enough that even Thor would be able to sense the connection between Loki and this child of Midgard. As much as Draco's Sather has grown in the time since he came to live with Loki, it is not as if the boy would become any less a half-mortal from Midgard. Friger would likely chide him for keeping her new grandson away longer than necessary, and maybe introducing the boy to a doting grandmother would help his little dragon's lonely disposition. No, waiting wouldn't improve his chances of obtaining some kind of status for the boy. Resigned to altering his timetables yet again, Loki shifts his plans to take the path which is in the best interest of the child of his magic. Loki conjures a formal Asgardian ensemble for Draco. The child's excitement over the attire brings a smile to Loki's face. It resembles what he himself had worn as a child during formal proceedings which he routinely attended, made from a fabric of his colors and symmetrically cut in the typical fashion of the armor worn by males in Asgard. "Father," Draco asks while looking at his outfit in the mirror, "these clothes are the same colors, but they don't look quite the same as yours. Is it because you are wearing grown-up clothes? Is this what children wear in Asgard? This is what little princes wear in Asgard." Loki answers Draco. It isn't that he cares about the ideals of masculinity associated with clothing in Asgardian society. It is simply that Draco has not shown any interest or asked any questions regarding gender expression or gender identity as of yet. Rather than confuse the still developing child with such topics too early, Loki will patiently provide guidance as Draco develops at his own pace. In fact, Loki did not even begin to favor the asymmetrical cuts generally associated with Asgardian women's clothing until just before he started sneaking off to other realms. He had gradually added the asymmetrical aesthetic to his clothing over time, lengthening one lapel or adding additional flourishes to one sleeve, but not the other. It was something he did for no other reason other than that he liked the look of it. He didn't care about fitting in. Loki remembered well the shock and disdain once his tastes evolved and became more apparent in his clothing. Of course, Loki's status as a royal prince gave him the freedom to challenge Asgardian gendered stereotypes without consequence. His actions undoubtedly inspiring Sif to style her armor more symmetrically and much more practically in later years. Over time, people simply accepted Loki's chosen style of dress and found other reasons for their subtle sneers and scornful whispers. There was no lack of disdain for the nature of his Sather, and no lack of suspicion for the ambiguity naturally gifted to him by virtue of his shape-shifting abilities, and no lack of rumors. When you could choose to appear however you wished, people would believe just about anything. The origins of Sleipnir, for example. So many accepted and repeated the tale that Loki had become pregnant while in the form of a mare to distract Svathilfari when, in truth, he had created Sleipnir as a gift for his father out of his own magic. Instead of being celebrated for accomplishing such a feat, he was mocked for his nature. Despite the degradation he felt inside, Loki maintained casual indifference on the outside. But Loki wants better for his little dragon. He wants Draco to always celebrate each of the unique things that make him who he is. Loki never wants the child of his magic to ever doubt his value. Regardless of the outcome of their visit to Asgard, Loki is determined to protect Draco in all ways. He gives Draco a hug and squeezes the back of his neck. It's a gesture of Thor's which has never failed to reassure Loki. He's never thought of using it with Draco until now. "Little dragon," Loki says, his heart filled with affection and fierce protectiveness as he speaks, "remember that you are the son of a prince of Asgard. Stand up straight and hold your head high no matter what. Do not let anyone tell you who you are. Remember who you are, my son. Know that I love you with all my heart, Draco. Believe in that when you cannot believe in anything else." Draco nods obediently, but he is perhaps too excited and too young for the words to be truly meaningful. But Loki hopes that his child remembers them in moments of doubt. Draco can't stop touching the shining green dragon scales that adorn the front of the leather cuirass and tassets of his new ensemble. He's worn these black pants and boots during training sometimes, of course, but everything else is new. He wonders what kind of dragon they came from. The dark green leather of the cuirass is woven tightly into a light armor which wraps around his sides securely. The hide, while sturdy, is also flexible, which makes it easy to move around in. Wrapping around his forearms are golden vambraces etched with beautiful designs like the ones on his father's golden armor. These match the golden greaves shielding his shins, bearing similar designs. Some of them he recognizes as runes of protection. Even though Draco hasn't gotten to practice with a real sword yet, he is still proud of the small one that hangs at his side. And he gets to wear a cape. The only thing that could make it more incredible is a helmet like the golden horned one his father is wearing. Draco follows his father on horseback to a remote part of the grounds, far past the Quidditch pitch and beyond the lake that lies on the edge of the estate. They come to stop at a cluster of willow trees. He still can't believe they are finally going to Asgard. "Can you see what is hidden here, little dragon?" his father asks. Draco squints and concentrates. His vision is suddenly filled with brightly glittering threads of magic in every color imaginable. Most shimmer iridescently and are almost transparent until they are woven together with other threads. Draco has learned how different colors do different things and how different patterns of different shapes and sizes affect the properties of the Sather. He scans the area and looks for the weavings of illusion, but sees nothing that stands out at first. Dismounting, he walks closer, trying to get a better look. Then, a flicker of a familiar pattern catches his eye. It is small and subtle, but he recognizes it at once. Lifting his hands in front of him, with precise and practiced movements of his fingers, he focuses to push other threads carefully out of the way in order to get a better look. When more of the intricate cross-hatching design is revealed, Draco's eyes widen in awe. It's stunning and more complicated than even the wards that protect the estate. He hopes that he will not be expected to untangle any part of it because he doesn't even know where he would begin. "Very good, Draco," he hears his father say beside him, and Draco preens at the praise. His father waves a hand, and a cave is revealed to his eyes. A secret path to Asgard lies just beyond this entrance. His father takes his hand and leads him inside. His eyes strain to see in the darkness within for only a moment before his father conjures a ball of glowing green light in his other hand. A great cavern filled with stalactites, beautiful and intimidating all at once, greets them. They go through the maze of tunnels and come to a precipice. Standing on the edge, Draco looks down at the yawning darkness and seemingly bottomless pit that lies beyond. His heart begins to race and he squeezes his father's hand. His father crouches down and wraps his arms around Draco. "Do not be afraid, little dragon," his father says. And suddenly they are falling headfirst. Draco clamps his mouth shut so as not to scream in fright as he pushes down his instinctual panic. He repeats his father's words in his head and frantically reminds himself that nothing can hurt him when he's with his father. He clutches tightly to the arms surrounding him. It seems as if they have been falling forever when he feels his father's Sather surround them. The world shifts and twists. One moment they are in complete darkness, and the next it is blindingly bright. Draco realizes that he's now looking up into the sky. It's a strange feeling to be falling downwards and then abruptly have gravity assert itself in a different direction. Draco is still expecting to land on his head, contrary to the fact that he is parallel to the ground. His body is so confused. All he knows is that he's still falling and the ground is getting closer and he can't make himself land on his feet. He closes his eyes and braces himself for the impact, but the impact never comes. They've stopped falling. His father gently lowers him onto his feet, but keeps his arms on Draco's shoulders while he finds his balance. He's a little dizzy and nauseous, so he keeps his eyes closed as he tries not to vomit. After some time, he feels his breathing slow back down and his heartbeat returns to normal. He hugs his father tightly. "That was awful, father," Draco pouts. Author's notes: Little Draco in Asgardian armor artwork by Ray Lemacree. Moments after his father teleports them to just outside the palace, two large ravens swoop in from the sky and perch on a branch above them. "Hugin." "Munin," his father greets the pair amiably. "Please let the Allfather know that I have returned and need to discuss an important matter with him." He casts a meaningful glance at Draco. The ravens turn their heads to focus on him, their eyes rapidly dilating and contracting in interest. Draco feels like they are trying to stare into his very soul and clutches his father's hand tighter. Hugin and Munin ruffle their feathers in amusement. One of the ravens clicks his tongue against his beak while the other tips his head downward. Then they both chatter softly before flying off. It is time, Draco, his father says as he releases his hand and starts to walk towards the palace. Draco's heart races as they approach the massive golden gates. He feels like nothing he's learned could have prepared him for this. It's more incredible than words in books can describe. Even Father's illusions, which filled entire rooms during their lessons, couldn't convey the magnitude of it. The majestic golden spires reach into the sky and overwhelm the landscape. Don't gape, little dragon, his father's voice speaks in his head. Sorry, father, Draco sheepishly thinks in reply. And none of that either. Stand proudly and walk boldly, just as a prince of Asgard should. It is a gentle reprimand, meant to be an encouragement just as much as an admonition. Draco is mindful of his father's words and does his best not to gawk at the overwhelming opulence. Every surface is adorned with intricate and exquisite designs. He tries not to let amazement show on his face as the crowds part easily for them, and the Einher, our palace guard, allows them pass without a word. Draco does his best to keep his face neutral as he's been taught when he sees people bowing respectfully out of the corner of his eye. Everyone knows who his father is. It gives him a heady feeling of importance and a confidence to his steps. He feels like he's finally starting to really understand what his father was trying to tell him about being royalty. Once they arrive at the entrance to the throne room, however, Draco feels a new rush of anxiety as they approach the massive golden dais upon which Odin Allfather, the king of Asgard and protector of the 9 realms, sits. His father slows his steps and makes his strides shorter so that Draco can easily match pace. Their procession towards the throne for an audience with the king seems to take forever, and yet Draco still feels like everything is moving so fast. He is dizzy with nervous energy. Draco finds the calm needed to maintain his composure from his father's reassuring words, repeating in his head like a mantra. As they get closer, he can see Queen Frigga standing regally by Odin's side, adorned in a flowing gown of gold. The mighty Thor stands next to the queen, in his shining armor with Mjolnir, the legendary warhammer forged in the heart of a dying star, hanging at his side. Draco takes in the sight of them and tries to comprehend that these legendary figures are his father's father, mother, and brother. He doesn't know quite what to make of that fact, but Draco hopes it means that they are his family too. All father, all mother, I would like to present the child of my Sather, the son of my heart, Draco Larkison. Loki notes that Odin looks even more serious than usual, his brow furrowed, as if Loki has brought him some troubling news. The youngest prince suddenly having progeny is rather unexpected. Loki hopes that his father's expression is not because Draco's existence has effectively decreased Loki's usefulness in potential alliances through political marriage. The very thought of Odin's disapproval of Draco on those grounds stirs turbulent emotions within him, so Loki sets the thought aside and tucks it neatly away. Compartmentalization has always been as easy as breathing for him. A brief look at his mother is enough to see that her eyes are shining with happiness. Loki's heart warms at her barely restrained glee. He knew she would react this way. She always understood him best. Thor looks confused, but that's neither surprising nor unusual. Loki lets his declaration of Draco's identity sink in for a moment before continuing. Due to a rather unexpected incident while I was passing through Midgard, he begins, and a few shocked whispers that ripple through the gathered crowd of nobles at his statement. Thor looks strangely surprised that Loki had traveled to a forbidden realm. Loki wants to roll his eyes. Technically, it is only forbidden to interfere with the lives of mortals, but Loki's visits to Midgard have been completely harmless. It's not as if he tried to do anything like invade and conquer the mortals after all. He refrains from showing any annoyance and continues smoothly. The Allfather and Allmother, at least, look completely unperturbed. My magic was called to this child at the moment of his conception. He is not born of my flesh or blood, but he is born of my magic. His mortal mother did not survive his birth, and his mortal sire was unfit to care for a child. As such, I have claimed him as my own earlier than expected. Unfit to care for the child, you say? Odin's eye seems to twinkle a bit as Loki simply nods once in response to his question, unable to hold back a frown at the memory of the abuse his little dragon suffered. I see, the Allfather says. Loki catches a fleeting upturn of the corner, the mouth so brief Loki thinks it might have been imagined. And despite the fact that this child is not truly of your blood, not born as guardian, but born to the realm of Midgard, you still wish to claim him as yours, my son? Odin asks. Loki blinks at the unexpected endearment during a formal proceeding and decides impulsively to return the affection, too warmed by the gesture to think very deeply on his next words. Aye, father. I am certain. Odin's face softens for a fraction of a second, and Loki wouldn't have caught it if he weren't already searching for an explanation for Odin King's unusual behavior. It's gone in less than an instant before Odin puts the stoic expression back in place and makes his official proclamation. Then, I hereby accept Draco Larkison as a member of the royal family, heir to my youngest child, Prince Loki, kin in every way that matters. Let no one dare question his legitimacy, or else face pain of punishment for treason. Loki can almost hear the sound of jaws dropping. A few of the nobles aren't able to hold back their gasps of surprise at the serious implications of Odin's decree. Not to mention the fact that there was absolutely no argument on the matter. Odin made no inquiry about why Loki was on Midgard or conduct examination on the character of Draco Sather. Only a single question was asked of Loki before the Allfather's decision was made. A single question asking if this was what Loki wished. He is absolutely stunned, and words escape his silver tongue for the first time in his memory. Loki had hoped to obtain some measure of acceptance for Draco, but he hadn't dared dream that Odin would go this far. The Allfather's stern tone leaves no mistake that the half-mortal boy from Midgard, who Loki has brought before his king and father, has been accepted unconditionally and is protected absolutely. No one will dare call Draco a bastard or question his right to be in Asgard overtly. Loki imagines there will be quite a lot of talk, but he's been gifted the right to demand punishment of any public insult that might be said against his son's origins. His little dragon is now an Asgardian in all the ways that he can be. Loki does not expect the happiness and relief that rushes through him. It is so powerful that his usually neutral expression falters, and he can't help but look at Odin with gratitude. The Allfather returns Loki's look with something that startles Loki even further. He can scarcely believe it, and it makes no sense, but there's no doubt. He's seen that look on the Allfather too many times to count, but in all his memories it was never directed at him. Always Thor. But in this moment, it is unequivocally for him his father's look of pride. Thank you, Loki finally manages to breathe. In 3 days' time, we shall feast in honor of my new grandson, Odin declares, and cheers echo through the throne room. When the formality of court is concluded, Friger maintains decorum only as long as it takes for the throne room to clear. The instant the door closes behind the last person, she rushes over and sweeps Draco into her arms, exclaiming, I finally have a grandchild to spoil. And a little mage at that. In all his life, Draco has never known family beyond Lucius Malfoy, and then, for the last year, his father. He remembers the friends he had had once talking about brothers, sisters, mothers, aunts, uncles, grandparents, and cousins. Draco understands the concepts, but he has no frame of reference in his own experiences to truly grasp the meaning of having that much family. For instance, he knew that his father has a brother named Thor, but he doesn't know what that means, not really, because he's never had a brother. He's imagined it, of course. Draco imagined it when he found that book with stories about Sleipnir, and he imagined having Odin's steed as a brother before his father, explained that those stories were wrong and Sleipnir was a magical construct. He knows, intellectually, that his father's parents are Odin and Frigga, which make them Draco's grandparents. But he doesn't really know. So it is that Draco is completely unprepared for Frigger's warm arms around him, cooing at him and saying what a handsome grandson he is. He's been given hugs before, of course. Even if he'd not received many hugs while at Malfoy Manor, in the time since he has come to live at the Odinson estate, he has never felt any lack of affection from his father. But this feels different somehow. Draco has never asked about his mother. All he knew was that he didn't have one. But suddenly being in Frigger's tender and loving embrace, he thinks that perhaps this is what it feels like. He melts. Frigger pulls back just far enough to kiss Draco's forehead and then folds her arms around him to give an affectionate squeeze. "Welcome to Asgard, little prince," she says sweetly. "I am your grandmother." Frigga stands up and takes Draco's hand in hers and then puts her arm in Odin's. "We shall take our midday meal in the North Gardens," she declares and begins to walk in that direction. Draco casts a quick glance over his shoulder to his father and sees him give a reassuring nod. Now that the shock of his father's decree is starting to wear off, Loki's mind is realigning expectations and considering possibilities as he follows his father and mother obediently to the North Gardens. They will be in Asgard for at least the next 3 days until the celebration feast, but should they stay longer than that? And while he is ecstatic to have gained the optimum status for Draco, with such advantages come disadvantages, and Loki must prepare accordingly. It isn't the first time he's pondered the potential dangers to the child of his magic, but it's the first time he's had the right context to make concrete plans in anticipation of them. He is yanked from his thoughts when Thor slaps a hand on his back. "Loki, you have been gone too long from these halls, and I am so pleased to have a nephew." Thor booms cheerfully as he affectionately clasps the back of Loki's neck with a broad hand. Loki smiles fondly at his brother, relieved that Thor too has accepted Draco so easily. "But brother, he is so tiny," Thor exclaims in a mix of odd curiosity and concern. Loki rolls his eyes. "Thor, he is only a child." The next morning, after an early breakfast with Odin and Frigga, Loki keeps Draco to his usual routine and takes him to the royal library after breakfast for the day's instruction. Draco is excited and curious, spending a good 10 minutes running around the library, looking at all the different sections, before finally settling down with Loki in one of the quiet alcoves he's always favored. Draco leans up against Loki's side, reading a book of Vanir fables that he's chosen for his free reading time, while Loki leafs through ancient scrolls detailing the first war with the Dark Elves. It is peaceful, and Loki silently thanks the Norns for the moment. Not even an hour passes before Thor finds them. "Loki, Draco." The all too familiar voice of his brother echoes loudly in the quiet space, and Loki knows that look on Thor's face. He knows exactly what his brother is there to ask before his lips can start to form the words. "Thor," Loki says through gritted teeth. "Draco engages in the training of the body in the afternoon after, has trained his mind. But surely, brother, exception can be made. The warriors 3 and Lady Sif are there now." Draco's eyes light up at that, and Loki feels his resolve weaken. "In exchange for a morning sparring in Asgard, you will have an afternoon of economics lessons and an afternoon of nothing but mathematics." Loki bargains with the boy. Draco's brow furrows as he thinks it over, because Loki has taught him the importance of carefully considering such things. After a moment, the boy nods to himself, having made his decision. "Yes, father, I will," Draco promises solemnly. Loki raises an eyebrow at his son's answer. "As you wish, little dragon. But know that the deal you've just struck is purely to satisfy your impatience, as we would have done just as Thor proposes not 3 hours from now. Remember that when you mourn the work ahead and lament your fate." He feels he must emphasize this for Draco and turn this unfortunate situation into a teaching opportunity. "Loki, you are too serious," Thor criticizes with an amused grin, and Loki holds back a snarl. He closes his eyes and exhales slowly to calm himself. Loki has always been patient with Thor's demands, but this feels different. He glares at Thor. "We'll meet you in the training yard then." Loki says before he teleports away with Draco. When they appear in the training yard, Draco immediately runs up to Sif with a bright smile. No doubt, because of all the tales he's told the boy about how Helga Hufflepuff reminded him of her. Loki realizes that he's probably told Draco more stories about Sif than anyone else. "You're the fierce shield maiden, Lady Sif," Draco exclaims. The boy's enthusiasm takes Sif completely by surprise. No doubt, Draco's surprising sociability makes a sharp contrast to the quiet boy that Loki was when they were all younger. To Loki's amusement, Sif looks to Loki with some confusion before Draco's excited words draw her attention to him again. "You fought beside my father and Uncle Thor." Sif glances at Loki uncertainly, likely wondering what tales he's told of their battles, then simply nods in response. Loki marvels at how the young boy has absolutely no hesitation when talking to strangers. The irony that he should have such an extroverted son when he himself so cherished solitude only increases his awe at the miracle that is his little dragon. For Loki, Draco represents limitless opportunities and endless possibilities. Can I call you Aunt Sif? Please," Draco pleads, and oh, how Loki knows that look. He'd succumbed to those large eyes a couple of times before the familiarity of it granted him a fragile immunity which still threatens to fail him occasionally. Loki almost bursts into laughter at Sif's shocked reaction. Only Draco would ask such an outrageously soft thing of the shield maiden whose savage skill in battle has earned her a place in the mighty Thor's entourage. She hesitates a moment, but not even Sif is ruthless enough to crush the hopefulness in the boy's earnest eyes. "Of course, Prince Draco," she says with a soft smile, and Draco throws his arms around her waist. "Good Lady Sif, I thank you for your indulgence," Loki says, and bows slightly to acknowledge the kindness that she has just shown to his son. When he straightens, their eyes meet, and Sif is looking at Loki as if she's seeing him for the first time. And perhaps, in a way, she is. Sif's never seen Loki as a parent after all. When Thor finally arrives, Loki continues to watch from a short distance away. While his heart warms at seeing his brother correcting Draco's strikes, Loki's body unconsciously tenses. Thor could accidentally hurt Draco. Is he even able to understand how fragile a half-mortal child is compared to an adult Aesir? Thor has a great many skills, but empathy is not one of them. The true source of his apprehension, however, is that the warriors of Asgard are ignorant to ways of those who wield magic in battle. So few mages of substantial power exist in the realm. As powerful as Odin Allfather's say there is, he is renowned more for his combat skill, despite possessing magical abilities so potent and powerful that they were known as the Odin Force. The Allfather could flatten armies with his magic as easily as waving his spear Gungnir. Without a doubt, pulverizing an enemy head-on was something all Asgardian warriors could comprehend and admire. But where the king of Asgard used his magic to level the battlefield by destroying it, its youngest prince leveled the battlefield with his Seidr, so that even the strongest opponents easily fell before him. It was not as direct, not as simple, not as straightforward. Yet Loki was just as effective and deadly as Thor in a fight. Even if Loki's combat style was so much more nuanced and far less appreciated, he decided long ago that he didn't care. It made perfect sense to him that he should take any advantage he could on the battlefield. So even though he is expecting it, when Thor makes an offhand comment, something about tricks not being honorable, Loki is suddenly possessed with a blinding rage that is impossible for him to hide. "Draco!" Loki shouts out, causing everyone to freeze at the sudden anger radiating from Thor's usually complacent little brother. "Why, yes, Father," Draco squeaks. "I am sending you back to our apartments. Clean yourself up." "I will be there shortly," Loki instructs, waving his hand to teleport Draco away before the boy can make any acknowledgement. Loki turns his back on Thor, uncertain that he will be able to restrain his ire if he sees the bewildered look on his brother's face that he knows is there. He takes a deep breath in an attempt to restore the usual calm demeanor Thor and their friends are used to seeing on him. but he cannot hold back from berating his golden brother. Draco will learn every trick there is in order to survive his battles. I'll teach him to wield unpredictability like the finest weapon ever forged to keep him safe. You do not get to make judgments in this, Thor, Loki says coldly. But then his tone becomes sharper and more menacing with his next words as his barely contained fury bubbles to the surface. When you have a child whom your enemies might murder in order to gain advantage over you, then you can talk to me about what you think is proper. When the possibility exists that your child could be gutted so Thathusintral can be used to bind you, then talk to me of honor and tell me what you would not do to keep your child safe. Thor, Sif, and the warriors three say nothing in response, doubtless too stunned by his words. Loki teleports away. Idun's apples are more and less than the myths mortals have created around them. They are indeed a component of Asgardian constitution, but they do not grant immortality. Even without the apples, the Aesir are simply longer lived than the mortals of Midgard. The miraculous fruit actually works to bolster the DNA and bring out the best possibilities of their genome. Asgardian strength, durability, and longevity is the result. One rare occasion, some notable members of the other races within the 9 realms have been gifted with a golden apple in the sole discretion of the All-Father, but no mortal could ever be allowed the same honor. In the case of a Midgardian, consuming even a taste of an apple would forcibly rewrite the human DNA to become something more like Aesir, a process which carries virtually no chance of survival for any mortal who would dare attempt to eat the fruit. But because Draco carries Loki's magic and is only half mortal, his little dragon is an exception to the rule. With just Loki's Sather, Draco's lifespan would far outlast any magical mortal of Midgard. But with Idun's apples, Draco will obtain the longevity of an Aesir along with increased strength. The process cannot occur all at once, however, and must be delicately undertaken. Idun greets them cordially when they arrive at her orchard, having already received word of the All-Father's decree. "Father, who is that beautiful lady?" The little blond boy whispers loudly in the way that children often do with an awestruck expression on his face. Idun looks to be easily charmed by Draco's innocent admiration. Where Sif was rendered helplessly confused, Idun appears hopelessly besotted. Loki chuckles that my little dragon is Idun. Draco's eyes go wide. "She's the keeper of the golden apples," he blurts excitedly. "That is correct, Draco Larkison," Idun says as she crouches down to look at the boy. "Welcome to my orchard." The little boy freezes with his mouth agape at the sudden proximity. "Hello, Idun," Loki greets. "Hello, Loki. Your son is quite charming." "And beautiful," Draco squeaks adorably at Idun's assessment. "What in the 9 realms did you do for the Norns to favor you so?" Idun finishes with a sardonic undertone. "I would never presume so much." "Perhaps they simply share my sense of humor." Loki shrugs, and Idun's smile starts to resemble a grimace. She never did approve of any of Loki's pranks. "In any event, I don't wish to take you from your duties any longer than necessary. You know what I've come for." "Indeed." And with that, Idun presents a golden apple to Loki. After taking the apple in hand, he twists his magic around it, condensing it down into its very essence. The shimmering liquid floats into the glass bottle that Loki has conjured specifically for holding these precious contents. Though the child will not even be given a bite of one of Idun's apples for many years, Loki will give Draco a drop of golden apple essence once they are back at the palace. There's no way to predict exactly how Draco's body will react, but it's beyond important. It's vital. Visions of the future did not solely come to Frigger as gifts from the Norns through her dreams. The Queen of Asgard possessed an insight that was uncanny. Instinctively, she saw patterns in emotions and behavior as easily as she saw the patterns in her weavings. From those patterns, she could naturally discern a great many things with a remarkable level of accuracy. When Frigga had heard about Loki's outburst at Thor the day after her new grandson arrived in Asgard, she was only surprised that it did not happen sooner. The All-Mother is a fighter because every Asgardian is a fighter, but her nature is that of healer and her passion is that of peacemaker. Frigga's greatest strengths are her intuition and empathy. She is devoted to her family and deeply feels the suffering of those she holds dear as her own. It is her blessing and her curse. So when her grandson is given a drop of golden apple essence, waves of anguish and distress hit her like 1,000 needles. A howling maelstrom of magic reaches out and resonates with her own as she feels an echo of Draco's physical agony as her own. Frigga doesn't have to imagine what it was like for Loki, because his heartache and guilt over his son's pain touches her as well. She clutches at her chest and doubles over where she is sitting, her weaver's distaff falling to the floor. Once she catches her breath, she immediately goes to Loki's apartments. She finds her youngest son sitting next to the bed where her grandson lies unconscious, recovering from the effects of the concentrated magic he has been given. Loki is wringing his hands in the same nervous habit that Frigga finds herself doing in times of stress. Even as he looks up when she enters, his eyes are lost in thought. My little Loki. The endearment snaps him out of his daze, and he scoffs incredulously at it. Oh, hush, Frigga chides. You'll always be my baby. You'll see in time. Draco will still be your little dragon when he's 1,000 years old. Frigga comes to stand beside Loki and puts her hand on his shoulder. You are a wonderful parent to him. I am proud of you, my little Loki. Loki's smile appears in a slow burst of delight. It's one of his rarer open smiles, free of care and filled with genuine warmth. It's only because you loved me so well, Mother, he compliments, and his smile tilts easily into his familiar, confident smirk. Ah, my Loki, what am I to do? A mother is not supposed to have favorites, but then you go and say things like that, she teases lightly. Frigga sees his smile falter slightly, and she knows her youngest son's insecurities are preying upon his mind. She's watched him his whole life and knows that Loki is complex and full of contradictions, sometimes idealistic and cynical in the same breath. Frigga did, in truth, love both her sons equally, and because of her love, she treated them both differently. For Thor, she was a pillar of unwavering support. Her intuition told her that too many limitations would be taken as disbelief in his abilities and would create self-doubt in her oldest boy. From the time he could walk, Thor seemed always to be testing his abilities and pushing his capabilities. He'd jump off furniture, run as fast and as far he could, lift any large object he could find, and climb things endlessly. He wanted to be in charge and in control of himself, even when he wasn't really big enough to do it. And where others may have seen ingratitude, certainly, Loki has always thought Thor ungrateful for everything he ever received. She saw a child who was forever looking to the next challenge. Though Thor lived in the present, he was ever focused on the future. When it came to Loki, Frigga saw her role as more complex because he was more complex. Thor was not simple, simply straightforward. Where Thor was a natural-born leader, Loki was neither truly leader nor follower, but observer instead. She had worried sometimes that he would get lost in a world of illusion because he seemed to spend so much time in his head. But as much time as he spent in a haze of thought, he also spent an equal amount of time being fiercely observant. When he wasn't lost in thought, he was always searching for deeper meaning in everything. What her youngest son needed most from her was not freedom, but space to be himself. But Thor's noisy presence demanded attention, whereas Loki's more quiet demeanor made it more difficult to know when he needed attention and when he needed to be left alone. Frigga knew she erred regularly in ascertaining his moods. Loki would never show when he was hurt by anything. Of course, you love both your sons the same, even if you do not treat us so, Loki says with a hint of bitterness that Frigga is able to perceive only because she knows him so well. Frigga frowns, but before she can reassure her son, he continues. No, it's all right, Mother, he sighs. I didn't understand that before, but I think I'm starting to understand now. Loki pauses as he looks down at Draco's sleeping form and places his hand on the top of his son's head. Children are such a wonder. You want to teach them, but then they wind up teaching you. You love them more than anything only to be astonished by their unconditional love. They trust you unequivocally. And then you hurt them because it's for their own good. Loki closes his eyes and exhales deeply. It was the worst thing imaginable to see him in such agony, Mother. It turned my stomach to know it was my decision to make him suffer because it waspist. You do your best, hope it is enough, and accept that you will sometimes fall short, she says tenderly. Neither speak for a while after that. The quiet stretches, but it is comfortable. Frigga, too, is fluent in silence. They've always been able to sit in stillness together. Loki absorbs the emotions of those around him. Frigga mirrors them. In these moments, they balance each other perfectly. But where Loki was indirect, Frigga preferred directness. Frigga decides to broach the issue of Loki's outburst the other day. Ever the peacemaker, she resolved to do what she can to help Loki reach an understanding, if not with Thor, then at least with himself. She knows it's not just about Thor's careless words the other day, nor Draco's current condition. After having been given the golden apple essence, she knows her son, and knows the turns of his tangled thoughts. Just because it can happen, it doesn't mean that it will, Loki. Your son is now protected as a prince of Asgard. She tries to reassure him, but he still says nothing. Frigga takes in his subtle facial expressions and hears everything he doesn't say in words. You were younger than Draco when you fell from a tree into a lake and then nearly drowned. The healers made you stay in bed for days. I remember how Thor cried constantly because he had failed to protect his baby brother. Loki frowns. Yes, I was following him up the tree as I recall. One of many examples of the torment I've endured for the love of my brother, of the sacrifices I've made for Thor's happiness. Despite resentment present in his voice, Frigga knows that Loki loved his brother and loved being the closest one to Thor. Even if it was often stressful for him, Loki still liked being pulled along on Thor's adventures because it made him feel special and wanted. Thor was an assertive child, Frigga comments, but I did not bring that story up to talk about Thor, didn't you? It's always about Thor, Loki grumbles. I brought it up because I felt helpless, much in the same way that you feel right now, and to reassure you that what you are feeling is all part of being a parent. Loki chokes in surprise at her words and looks up at her with such vulnerability that her heart aches at the sight. He is over 1,000 years old, but Loki might as well be a boy of 10 to Frigga's eyes. Loki is distraught in the uncertainty. Loki is terrified of failing. He suddenly has something very precious to protect, and it feels like the whole world is against him. Frigga suspects that on some deeper subconscious level, Loki likely feels betrayed by Thor. Even if Loki might know logically that Thor can't possibly comprehend the dangers which Loki fears, the fact that his golden brother, who has ever been a steadfast protector, doesn't understand makes him feel alone and abandoned. Frigga understands the fragility of Loki's deeply buried emotions, the facades he put up for everyone else around him. Where others saw his masks, Frigga could always see straight to the heart of her baby boy. She puts her arms around him and holds him firmly without a word. Frigga tries to be what she's always hoped to be to Loki, a sanctuary of acceptance and understanding where he could be seen and known. My little dragon, this will not be pleasant, but it is necessary. No matter what happens, do not fear. Draco can taste the magic of the golden apple when it falls onto the tip of his tongue. For an instant, it's the sweetest and most delicious flavor he's ever known before it feels like his body has burst into flames. There's so much pain. It's as if a fire is consuming him. He opens his mouth to scream, but no sound comes out. It feels like his lungs are burning and won't even take in air. And then everything goes dark. He wakes up with his father and grandmother at his bedside. They fuss over him and ask him how he's feeling. Draco doesn't feel any differently. In fact, he feels completely fine. Still, father, that was awful, Draco pouts. Will I have to do that again? And even though he knows the answer, he asks because just wants to besir. His father gives him a hug and says against his temple, I'm sorry, my little dragon, but yes. It will get easier and you'll grow stronger over time. He pulls away to look into Draco's eyes. I would not make you endure this if it was not important. Do you understand? Draco nods in response and hugs his father back. You were so brave, little one. You did so well. His grandmother praises and reaches over to grasp his hand. Now, you have your first Asgardian feast to attend, and someone has told me that you play the Horkenhorn. Would you please give us a song or two tonight? Draco nods eagerly. Yes, grandmother, and practically leaps out of bed. Hellavest Horkenhorn. Draco will never forget the first time his father brought him to the music room of the estate and told him to pick an instrument to learn. Among all the familiar instruments he already knew about was a large golden instrument which resembled a more complicated version of a French horn. It was far more intricate than any brass wind he'd ever seen before, with a labyrinthine body of slides, keys, and valves. The double bells were adorned with finely detailed ornamental etchings which ensnared the eye with its beautiful intricacy. Father, what is that? He had inquired eagerly as he ran up to it. Ah, the Horkenhorn. It is a traditional Asgardian instrument. Quite the challenge to learn because of the focus it requires to create the balance needed, and only a mage is able to bring forth its full potential. Could I learn to play it, father? If that is what you wish, little dragon. I learned the basics of it when I was your age. I never seemed to get along with the Horkenhorn, however. You didn't like it, but he asked with concern. His father smiled and picked up the Horkenhorn. If it interests you, then why should my experience with it matter? You will need to discover the instrument for yourself, and my opinion would provide no guidance in this. Now, the first thing is how to hold it. When his father first played a song on the Horkenhorn for him, Draco was absolutely mesmerized from the moment he heard the rich notes it produced. It sounded like a French horn, the way a chocolate bar tasted like a chocolate cake, the same in essence, but so much more complex. The dulcet sounds which flowed from the Horkenhorn felt almost tangible and filled him with glee. And then, suddenly, the Sather in the room coalesced into several luminescent spheres. They flew around him and moved in sync with the music. Draco had laughed in delight and clapped his hands in glee. The Horkenhorn didn't just play the most wondrous music Draco had ever heard. It also generated magical overtones, which could be channeled into harmonic illusions. His father explained that it took strength and precision to balance both the physical and magical vibrations, that it was like trying to play two melodies at once using only one instrument. Additionally, the magical overtones could easily overwhelm the melody when there wasn't enough focus or control. But when balance was achieved and those vibrations were in phase, they would reinforce each other and create the most enchanting music. Though the Horkenhorn generated a base for illusions, Draco learned that it wasn't at all like the weaving of threads of Sather in precise cross-hatchery. It was more like painting of merging and blending the colors together. The magical vibrations were like different textures that synthesized in different ways to create illusions that harmonized with the music. And somehow, the illusions made the music even more euphonious. At the start of his lessons, his father had impressed upon him that learning the Horkenhorn would require strength of core, precise breath control, and dexterity of the fingers. Draco practiced diligently and was thrilled to find that playing the instrument came almost naturally to him. He soon found out, however, that the most difficult part about learning the Horkenhorn was the mental discipline it required. It was necessary to always be in control of your emotional state while playing it. Letting your mind wander would bring forth unintended illusions that could range from ridiculous to terrifying. One of the first songs Draco had learned was so sad and melancholy that his thoughts drifted to his lonely life at Malfoy Manor. When his mind wandered, the soft, hovering lights turned into terrifying flashes of bright yellow, the same color of the curse that hit him the day his father had come for him. Draco had become frightened when the sounds of the Horkenhorn had darkened and rumbled ominously. Still, Draco was memorized by the potential of what it could do, of the potential for the beauty it could create, and the challenge of learning to master it, and especially because it was from Asgard. The celebration hall is filled to capacity, and all the best fare has been brought out. The sights and smells of the feast bring a sense of warm familiarity to Loki. Even if he's been reluctant at times to attend the feasts of Asgard as part of his obligations, they occupied a large space in his memories. It was easy enough to blend into the background amidst all the revelry, unless Thor called for him to recount tales of their adventures with his famous silver tongue. Though many had forgotten, it was in this very hall where Loki had truly earned the name Silver Tongue. Before he earned a reputation as a trickster who lied with the truth, he was known for the way he enraptured the halls with his gift for storytelling. Loki did so love holding an audience in thrall by the power of his words. He knew exactly what to emphasize, what to embellish, and what to leave out. He would make the audience light up with laughter by sarcastically making light of a dire situation, or make them gasp in surprise at some unexpected twist he'd hold back until just the right moment. It was amusing to control the narrative and watch the crowd hold their breath at his dramatic pauses, and it was pure satisfaction when he could move an audience to tears. Loki loved knowing exactly how to tell a story in order to evoke exactly the emotions he wanted. In their youth, Thor had the terrible habit of interrupting his storytelling frequently to correct his version of events, which took away the momentum he was orchestrating. Such detractions always ruined the tale that Loki was spinning. Thor was of the belief that a good story required accuracy. After repeated fights, wherein Loki scolded Thor for trying to improve a tale by interjecting unnecessary details about their battles, his too forthright brother finally accepted that Loki's version of a tale was always the best version. These days, Loki did not perform his role as storyteller often. At most, he'd only give a single tale from their youth on only one night out of the several nights that a feast would last. He had developed the habit of retiring early in the evenings during these feasts, weary from being dragged along for his brother's exploits ventures, which seemed more for Thor's self-satisfaction now and less about the adventuresome spirit they had as young warriors. But when he did choose to oblige to a request from his brother or one of the warriors three, it was the only time that Loki felt fully at ease during these events. Watching Draco play the Hawkenhorn now, he is pleased to see that familiar captivation in the faces of the crowd. It's quite akin to the kind Loki has the power to create through words. When his little dragon started playing, there were looks of surprise at the first rich and brassy notes. The conversation in the room quickly died down to listen to their newest prince play the Asgardian instrument few ever mastered. Draco had chosen an old battle anthem to play, but his prodigious skill is evident even in the familiar chorus, which warriors would hum around campfires. The polyphonic instrument comes to life in his hands in a way it never had for Loki. Loki thought the Hawkenhorn itself a selfish instrument, demanding too much of one's emotions to create the phantasmagorical overtones to the melody. So greedy was the Hawkenhorn for its musician's love. When he had tried to learn to play it in his youth, Loki had fought with the emotional component required for mastery of it and rebelled against the feeling of being so exposed. Loki had never been able to fully open up enough to breathe life into the musical performance the way it demanded. But Draco was a natural at the instrument. His little dragon had a thirst to experience everything, and was therefore willing to give everything in order to obtain the levels of artistry he pursued. Midway through, the melody slows down from its frenzied beginning to reflect the lull between battles during a war and the anticipation of waiting for the last and final exciting push. It is also somewhat of a lament for those who have fallen and received the glory of meeting death in battle. The bright golden illusions accompanying the song dim to a somber pewter and still their movements. Just as Loki would artfully pause in his storytelling, Draco just as masterfully commands the pauses in the music. The silence between the notes have meaning, he'd told Draco. The queen is so moved that she starts to sing. Her voice and magic adds more resonance for the Hawkenhorn, and Draco channels the additional energy prodigiously, transforming the hovering lights into a beautiful silver cascade around the queen. Gasps of delight are heard in response. By the finale of the song, which crescendos excitingly, the entire hall is singing and pounding on the tables rhythmically. Golden shadows shaped like cavalry charges and warriors swinging their weapons in attack fly around the hall in a brilliant display. The applause and roaring cheers are deafening. Loki can't even hear his own voice in the cacophony. After the final note is played, Draco raises his fist and yells in triumph and in camaraderie with all those in the hall. Odin and Frigga look so pleased. Loki has never felt so much pride. Perhaps it's due to too much mead, or maybe it's due to the emotions incited by Draco's performance, but several look over to Loki and raise a glass to him that night. Even Sif gives Loki a smile that is so warm and happy that Loki's first thought is that Thor is standing behind him. But no, Thor is still seated at the other end of the table, avoiding eye contact with Loki and sulking in that prideful way that he does when the two of them are at odds. As the revelry goes on, Draco's sociability shines. He roams the hall chattering happily with everyone from servants to nobles. Children are a rarity on Asgard, as their longevity comes with a commensurately low birth rate. That fact, coupled with his status as their newest prince, makes it unsurprising that Draco can hold their attention so easily with his simple, curious questions. Loki also observes that Thor is hovering around Draco and has been placing random portions of food on his plate. "You must eat your full so that you can grow strong, nephew," Thor's voice blares as he sets a large chunk of meat in front of Draco. "But Uncle Thor, I think I ate my full 3 plates ago," Draco responds, looking slightly ill. Loki rolls his eyes, knowing exactly what Thor is thinking, and annoyed that his brother's guilt may wind up making Draco sick on the first night of the feast. He walks over to rescue the boy from Thor's good intentions. A week later, the celebration feast winds down. And then, a few days after that, Loki and Draco are preparing to return to Midgard. Loki estimates that they'll spend less than half of their time at the Odinson estate now that Draco has been granted status as a prince of Asgard. Loki promises Frigga that they will come back soon and that their next stay will be longer. And Odin has hinted at sending him to lead a diplomatic delegation to Vanaheim to hear the terms of a new trade treaty. It is surprising given that such a task would typically fall to Frigga due to her ties to that realm. Loki can't explain this sudden attention, but thinks that perhaps it was his extended time away from Asgard of late which has precipitated the Allfather's whims. Still, regardless of the reason, it is gratifying that his skills outside of battle are finally being recognized. Thor is already at the Bifrost when they arrive. He stands slightly behind Heimdall with arms crossed and shoulders slumped. Since Loki's tirade at the sparring grounds a week ago, Thor has lingered at the edges of Loki's orbit, but has avoided speaking to him. Loki knows his brother's typical approach to problem-solving relies on using brute force, but this is not a problem that can be solved by going to war or killing some frost giants, so Thor is uncertain. His prideful golden brother ducks his head and looks away rather than acknowledge his presence. Draco has barely dismounted his horse when he's running up to the stoic Heimdall. "You're Heimdall, gatekeeper of Asgard." "The all-seeing sentry of the Bifrost," Draco says rather loudly in his excitement, and then pauses before asking in a more normal volume, "Why didn't you come to the feast?" "I was here at my post, Prince Draco. It is my sacred duty as the gatekeeper of this realm." "I never leave it. Never ever," Draco questions skeptically. The sentry simply shakes his head. "That sounds so boring," Draco concludes with all the wisdom of his 8 years of life. Heimdall chuckles in amusement. "With so much to see and hear, Prince Draco, there is no boredom in my vigilance." "But isn't it lonely to be out here alone all the time?" "Who do you talk to?" the boy asks. Heimdall raises an eyebrow at Draco's query just as Thor interjects. "All who seek to use the Bifrost must call out to Heimdall." And what use it is to tell him tales of our adventures when he has already seen them, Thor offers lightly. Draco frowns thoughtfully as they walk towards the Bifrost before his expression sharpens into one of seriousness. I'll talk to you, Heimdall, so be sure to listen. Heimdall's eyes widen ever so slightly in surprise before he responds, Of course, my prince. I will hear you wherever you are. Draco is practically vibrating with excitement when they enter the Bifrost. When it begins to spin and glow, he makes a face like he just remembered something and runs over to Thor. Bye, Uncle Thor, he says, and then throws his arms around him. See you next time. Draco skips back to Loki's side, and they turn towards where the portal will form. Loki, Thor calls out, and the seriousness in his voice makes him turn around. I will not let any harm befall my nephew. I will protect Draco with my life, and anyone who would dare threaten him will meet a swift end. His brother pledges solemnity. Loki sighs, then gives his brother a small nod before taking hold of Draco's hand to lead him through the Bifrost's portal. It is not an apology, but it is enough. The wizarding world of Midgard exists in small extra-dimensional pockets, like which occupy only a small space in the physical world of the non-magical mortals. Something as simple as a brick wall, for example, serves as anchor and access point to the rest of the space, which actually exists a few ticks removed from the default dimension. All over the realm, the various communities of the mortals born to magic remained hidden from the rest of their world through these bubbles of reality. The Odinson estate exists in the same manner, albeit modified with Loki's magic to have multiple anchors and access points across Midgard. It would not be wholly inaccurate to compare the wizarding world to the Amish communities of the non-magical peoples of this realm. Almost 400 years ago, the International Confederation of Wizards determined that all contact with those not naturally born with magic, even those who had learned some other form of magic, would be regulated. So it was that the wizarding world cut itself off from any magic not its own. For the sake of safety, along with a sense of pride and pureblood doctrinal beliefs, it was decided centuries ago to keep their society isolated from the rest of their world, even those with whom they shared magic in common. Yet there was no Rumspringa for the young witches and wizards who had just come of age, as there was for Amish youth. After 3 generations, even the knowledge of magic other than that taught in wizarding schools became known only at the highest levels of government. Only the elites knew of the Midgardian magicians and sorcerers who learned to channel universal energies and whatnot. In the wizarding world, the very idea that there was magic which could be performed by mortals who had not received a magical inheritance was ridiculed as a conspiracy theory. Loki had educated Draco on these matters, and more, of course. He had strictly cautioned the boy against revealing information outside the common knowledge of the mortals of Midgard, magical and non-magical alike. The boy had thought it an injustice at first. It had helped to explain that such things were inherent in learning the rules off the game context determined the role played and the persona projected in all situations. Auspiciously, Draco was adaptable and spontaneous enough to embrace this perspective. Such suspension of belief and compartmentalization of knowledge of the 9 realms was necessary to operate in Midgard without violating the Allfather's decree of non-interference. Loki has built numerous aliases across the realms, and the wizarding world of Midgard is no exception. The Odinson name has been established in it for over 1,000 years as a wealthy and prestigious, if a bit reclusive, wizarding family based out of Scandinavia with estates in the most prominent wizarding communities such as London and New York. Overall, Loki finds that it is much less fuss than being around non-magical mortals of Midgard. It's in these wizarding communities that Loki can move about more freely and be less discreet with his magic during his visits to Midgard. A simple illusion makes his teleportation appear as the apparition that these magical mortals use. His Asgardian clothing is accepted as the traditional wizarding robes of Scandinavia. He should know since he started their fashion trends centuries ago. Wizarding shops have their uses, even if somewhat limited, so Loki is no stranger to Diagon Alley. Draco, on the other hand, is. Since Loki had become cognizant of Draco's extroversion, the two of them have traveled to many places in Midgard. Loki has taken the boy to both the magical and non-magical cities of the realm. Draco loved new experiences the way that Loki loved learning about new things. Therefore, in anticipation of the ritual of procuring supplies in preparation for Draco's first year at Hogwarts, Loki has never brought Draco to this particular shopping district until today. The wonder that fills the boy's eyes when he sees Diagon Alley for the first time is priceless. His little dragon is now 11 years old by the Midgardian calendar and has received his Hogwarts acceptance letter. Though Draco is actually closer to 13 years old due to the time they have spent in Asgard, the magic of the golden apple essence has already slowed his aging slightly, and he is still physicalianly about 11 years of age. His slowed aging isn't so much of a change that it cannot be offset easily. Loki calculates that so long as Draco spends time in Asgard during his breaks, he will appear to age normally to his Midgardian schoolmates. The accompanying enhancements granted by said magic are also more noticeable now, but not enough to raise suspicion amongst the mortals. Draco is unusually strong when compared with a mortal, but not unnaturally so. It will be a few more years yet before his strength reaches superhuman levels, and it isn't enough. Though Draco has received some benefit from the magic of the golden apples and has improved much in his combat abilities, it is not enough that Loki would risk the boy's safety by bringing him to a realm other than Midgard or Asgard. When Loki's duties call him to other realms, Draco was always left in the care of Friger. The potential of threats in the form of the political, magical, and personal enemies Loki has accumulated over the centuries represented too great a threat. Only the fact that he has laid the foundations of Hogwarts protections himself gives him peace of mind enough to allow his little dragon to be so far from his presence for so long. Their first stop is Madame Malkin's. As soon as the seamstress saw Loki, she had remarked apologetically that she didn't carry any Scandinavian wizarding robes. And then Draco had poked his head out from behind Loki and announced cheerfully that he would be starting at Hogwarts. A flicker of recognition passed over her face at the sight of Draco, and she tensed before calling over an assistant to fit him for his Hogwarts robes. "Father, why do some robes look like dresses and some look like really big coats?" asks Draco from atop a footstool while the shop assistant pins up his long black robes. Since they arrived in the shop, the boy has been asking question after question about the wizarding robes he's been seeing in Diagon Alley. In all their journeys, Draco has always shown a fascination for the different types of attire that the mortals of Midgard wear. Asgardian clothing didn't have so many deviations and iterations as the varied styles in Midgard. The child has mostly worn Asgardian tunics and leathers, except for the times they've had to blend in when visiting non-magical cities. Without a doubt, Draco is elated about the novelty of getting robes for school. The more traditional robes are relatively unchanged from the 15th century. The more tailored style of robes, like the ones of Hogwarts you are to be fitted for, arose as trousers became more popular, Loki explains. Just then, Madame Malkin comes back and stands a boy with messy hair and glasses who looks about Draco's age onto a stool next to him. She slips a long robe over the other boy's head and begins to pin it to the right length. Loki recognizes the boy at once, but Draco seems more interested in the fact that there is another boy his age he can talk to. Draco's never had much interest for the noteworthy events of Midgardian history from the past 50 years, and has always showed a clear preference for his lessons about ancient civilizations, so it isn't too surprising. Still, Loki mentally sighs at his son's inability to recognize one of the most famous personalities of the wizarding world in the past century. "Hello, Hogwarts too?" Draco asks the boy next to him. Harry had been nervous since entering the shop which Hagrid had gestured to before going off to the leaky cauldron to recover from the Gringotts cart ride. He really didn't want to have to do this alone, but Hagrid did look a bit sick. The man had rescued him from the Dursleys' plan to keep him from learning that he was a wizard, and Harry didn't want to impose by insisting that Hagrid accompany him. The thought of acting like a demanding, spoiled brat like his cousin Dudley made his stomach lurch. When the pale, blond boy had greeted him, Harry was filled with equal parts of excitement and dread. He didn't have any friends, but in this new world of magic, he keenly felt the possibility of it. Hope warred with apprehension. Harry was still new to this world and felt insecure in his ignorance of it. "Yes," he answered meekly. "Wizarding robes are a bit weird, aren't they? They're like really big cloak coats," the other boy says while waving his arms to make the large sleeves of his robe flap around in emphasis. It makes Harry chuckle a little, but he makes no comment since he's still not quite sure what to say about anything to do with being a wizard. He wondered if his normal clothes were out of place here, if his oversized hand-me-downs marked him as much as an outsider to wizards as they did to his schoolmates who looked at him with scorn and pity. "Do you know what house you want to be sorted into at Hogwarts?" the pale boy inquired. "No," Harry replies honestly. Hagrid isn't here to explain things to him. His teeth begin to hurt, and he realizes that he's clenched his jaw tightly. The question assumes that he knows, and Harry feels stupid. He feels foolish at the thought of trying to guess at what the other boy is talking about. It sounds like it's a simple thing that everyone should know, he thinks. His nails dig into his palms. Harry wishes he could say something interesting. Useless, he silently berates himself. The boy on the stool meets his eyes in the mirror, and Harry thinks he's never met anyone with grey eyes before. He quickly looks away, self-conscious and not wanting to stare. "Oh, you have green eyes like my father," the other boy enthuses, drawing Harry's attention back to the mirror. He looks around and then finishes offhandedly, "Here somewhere." The grey-eyed boy regards him for a moment and then grins and says, "That's all right, I don't know either." At the other boy's admission, Harry feels himself relax slightly. He doesn't want this boy to look at him like he's stupid, so if the blonde boy doesn't know, then it's probably fine that Harry doesn't know either. "I've never actually been to Diagon Alley before," the other boy says. "Oh, it's my first time here too," Harry says with some relief. Finally, Harry thinks something we have in common. "I'm Draco Odinson. What's your name?" Before he can answer, Madame Malkin says, "That's you done, my dear." And he hops down from the footstool. Harry hesitates. He could use this as an excuse to stop talking. If he stays, then he might get asked about more things he doesn't know. Harry could leave right now and avoid another question that could make him look stupid. He can simply say that he needs to leave. And if he doesn't say his name, then Harry can avoid that unsettling feeling that strangers somehow knew more about his life than he did. As if it wasn't enough to discover that magic was real and he was a wizard, this morning Hagrid had told him that Harry was famous. It was overwhelming to deal with while he was still struggling to understand how this new world worked. The people Harry met today reacted strangely to hearing his name. They stared at his scar, and their eyes regarded him with expectations that he couldn't understand. Everyone at the leaky cauldron had wanted to shake his hand, repeatedly. Suddenly having people crowd around him so closely had been uncomfortable. He didn't want Draco to do any of that. Harry wasn't used to being the center of attention and didn't like how focused that attention was. It made him feel like he couldn't think, only react. Harry felt so helpless in his ignorance, but Harry's never been one to overthink or submit to the whims of his feelings. In his experience, putting the needs of others above his own was always the quickest and surest path to acceptance, so he'd learned to disregard his own feelings. He also didn't believe in making decisions based on such temporary, fleeting things. Harry generally tried to ignore that he even had them for the most part because he didn't trust them. There were other things that were more reliable, like logic and reason, and there's something a sort of sincerity in the other boy that pulls at Harry. He looks back at Draco and says quietly, Harry Potter, bracing for some sort of reaction. Draco simply extends his hand with a warm smile and eyes that did not ask for anything other than friendship. Harry had felt a tumult of emotions since waking up this morning and realizing Hagrid's visit had not been a dream. Happiness, wonder, confusion, surprise, uncertainty, excitement. Yet, for the first time since learning he was a wizard, Harry suddenly feels at ease. "Nice to meet you, Harry," Draco says brightly as they shake hands. He's finished his fitting now as well, and Harry takes in the other boy's unusual clothing that was previously hidden under the robe. He's seen a lot of strange clothing today, but there's something that makes it stand out all its own. It's mostly leather for one thing, and it has bits of gold metal here and there which look decorative but also protective. My father's taking me shopping for my school supplies. Do you have someone to help you around? Yes, but he got a bit sick from the Gringotts carts and went to the leaky cauldron to recover. He says with a glance at the window to check if Hagrid's come back. I thought he'd be back by now. Draco, we can wait with your new friend for his guardian to return. He hears a cool voice from behind him say. He turns around and sees a tall man with elegant features dressed in the same kind of clothing as Draco. He's wearing a long leather coat, one of the sleeves textured with diagonal weaving. He smiles kindly at Harry and introduces himself. Hello, Mr. Potter. I am Loki Odinson, Draco's father. When Harry introduced himself, his name sounded familiar to Draco, like it was part of some important story he'd read. But after a brief moment of trying to recall where he'd heard it, he shrugged it off. He loves meeting new people, and he's rarely had the opportunity to meet anyone his own age. He brought up Hogwarts houses earlier because he's never talked to anyone his own age about Hogwarts houses, and he can't help but wonder what colors will trim his new robes once he finally gets sorted. But since Harry seemed less than enthusiastic about his question, Draco decided not to push the subject and has instead been asking Harry about his favorite things. Though the topics seem mundane, the conversation is still interesting to Draco. Finding out Whipapple thought the things they did was fun. They debated the merits of steak versus chicken for a bit before it turned into a discussion of what they liked most about each season. Best of all, Harry seems to become more animated, and Draco feels a sense of accomplishment at being able to draw the other boy out of his self-consciousness. After they have been standing outside with Harry for what seems like a long while, Draco thinks that he wants to get on with his school supply shopping, but he also doesn't want to part from his new friend. He comes up with the most brilliant solution. You should come along with us. Diagon Alley isn't that big, so your friend will be able to find you. Draco turns to his father and gives his most pleading look, making his eyes as big as possible and sticking his lower lip out in a pout. Please, father, can he come along with us? Please. His father thankfully looks amused. Draco knows from experience that increases his chances of getting his way. Draco, perhaps we should ask your new friend what he'd like to do, his father asks. He turns to Harry expectantly and says, You don't really want to stand here waiting who knows how long all by yourself, do you? Harry begins hesitantly. I would like that if it's not too much of a bother to have me along. Of course it's not. Right, father. His father chuckles. Not at all. In fact, your company would be most welcome, Mr. Potter, and gives a knowing smile. Harry ducks his head shyly and says, Thank you. Draco realizes that his father must know who Harry is. He'll have to ask later. He doesn't want Harry to think he doesn't know anything.